But we've got a really jam-packed schedule today. We're going to be going until 5 o'clock, including lunchtime, and Angie was going to give us just a quick introduction and overview of what we can expect from today. Oh, did you want me to do this first? It just feels weird to have you standing there without introducing yourself, so. All right, let me tell you a little bit about the Tribal Climate Health Project and how it started and where it's going. As you all know, we're in kind of a weird place as far as funding right now for climate change work, and that is also where we were when the Tribal Climate Health Project began in 2016. And we were awarded EPA funding for a 5-year grant to do outreach to tribes on the health impacts of climate change, which at the time, people weren't really thinking about too much. They weren't thinking about things like heat illness or risks of hypothermia or vector changes where you've got mosquitoes and ticks bringing previously unfamiliar diseases into your area. So that's what the grant was for. Well, we got the first year of funding, and in November of 2016, there was a political thing that happened that, okay, it was Trump, and his administration, they didn't rescind the grant, they just didn't fund the grant for the next 4 years. So we had to find money from other places. Thankfully, there were other partners like the BIA's Tribal Climate Resilience Program, the CDC had some money through the National Indian Health Board. We got some money from some state agencies, and we were able to continue the work all this time. So now we're in the situation where, again, we're dealing with the Trump administration and their failure to recognize the imminent threat of climate change, and of course, especially to the health and well-being of tribal communities. That's why we're still here. That's why we're still doing the work. That's why you are in this room, so we can share with you what we've done and will continue to do over the last 9 years to create tools and resources, webinars, and then of course trainings like this one, and assistance, we hope, with finding those resources that we need to keep doing this incredibly important work. And we have some folks in the room today that are from the state. We have a lot of folks obviously from tribes, so we're hoping that we can have that networking to help each other find out what are the possibilities, what can we still do, and at least in California, the leadership here is still taking climate change seriously. So with that, now I can hand it over to Angie to introduce herself.
That's an extreme close-up. Good morning, friends. I'm so happy to see you all. For how many of you is this your very first time at the Tribal Climate Health Project? Oh, new friends. Okay, well, thank you for coming. Like Shasta said, we've been at this for 9 years, and can we just take a moment to say thank you to Paula for its leadership, for hosting. Okay. And Shasta in particular, who has really been at the helm and really wanting to help do what we do at the Tribal Climate Health Project for tribes around the country. Today we have a primarily state focused audience, so we're mainly here from California. I'm Angie Hacker. I am the CEO of Prosper Sustainably, so we've been working with Shasta since the beginning of this program, and it's one of my favorite things to do. We were here last year together, and that what we always like to do it right around election season because we like to torture ourselves, I think. We were here right after the results came in, so it's been quite a year. So I'm taking hugs today. I'm giving a lot of them. It's been wild, but I also want to say thanks to Shasta because she had to do some serious fighting and clawing to keep this program funded. So nice work. Okay, next slide, please. Where's the clicky? Okay, a few of our accomplishments. I'm going to not talk too much, but we've just been at this for a while. So we have trained over 1,000 tribal serving practitioners across the state, lots of presentations. We have full trainings. If you were there on a webinar we did a couple of weeks ago, you learned all about the services. They're all offered free. We've tried to organize them in a ways that you can access however you like. When we did this program, we decided what we really want to do is to help tribes prepare for the impacts of climate change on their health, and it turns out health touches almost everything. And so that has meant we have not only just done trainings, which didn't seem like enough, we have built tools, we have talked about how we can help folks develop the data needed to make good decisions, we have turned more to a peer learning model, which is what you're going to see today. How can we learn more from each other? But we also have some really great experts in the room, and you are among them, and you are them. And so we have a bunch of stuff coming up, including more webinar series. Has any of you signed up for our TechX webinar series? It's a bi-monthly series. Okay, so after this, you'll get more information about how to stay in touch with us. But we do a lot of stuff, and our whole goal is to try to make it easier for you working on the inside of a tribal community to continue to do the work of climate resilience, even as it continues to get harder. And we know that. Okay, so we're here for each other today. I'll take that clicky. So I get the job of telling you a little bit about what we're doing together today as a summit. The summit theme is Realities of Tribal Climate Disaster Resilience. What do we mean by that? Well, what is disaster resilience? Disaster resilience is here's one definition, you might have a different one. The ability of individuals, communities, systems, and societies to withstand, adapt to, and rapidly recover from disasters or shocks while maintaining essential functions and structures by learning from past disasters and reducing future risks. We'll see if we got that right, because we have disaster and emergency folks in the room who are going to help us differentiate. What is that line between climate adaptation, disaster resilience, and emergency management? So that's kind of the topic of today. Our objectives for today are to gain greater knowledge and understanding of how you're affected by and are addressing the impacts associated with climate-induced disasters, including flooding, wildfire, and extreme heat. And then we're talking about how we can learn from the emergency management model, best practices, and through that lens in that field. This is our very tiny agenda of the day, but you do have a packet with you, and I wanted to encourage you to take a look at that packet. It will guide you through the day. It is, fortunately, an interactive session where we have lots of opportunities for you to talk to each other, and there is food and breaks. If you need to take care of yourself, please do it. Just go take breaks when you need to. Go use the restrooms, get more coffee. What we are really hoping from you today is just your presence, your engagement, and to help each other learn from each other. So we have you up until 5 o'clock. And at 5 o'clock, we're hoping that you will stick around and hear, you can talk to folks that are here with more help. So we appreciate the folks that have come with services and help in hand. You can connect with them and just connect informally, network, and hang out and get to know each other. So this gives me a chance to say thank you. We already said thanks to Paula and to our funders. Primarily today is funded by the BIA through the Tribal Climate Resilience Program. And I also get a chance to say thank you to the many folks that organized today. So raise your hand, Tina Fernandez with Paula. She's in here. She's still working. Serena Guyano, where are you? She's back in the back. Lori Montserrat and Tila Combs. You can talk to any of these folks if you're having any needs today. And then our speakers. So what we like to do in this space is to have our attendees actually be speakers, right? So some of you said, I'm willing to speak in your registration. We said, thank you very much. So we get to hear from mostly you today and not so much me, which is exactly how we designed it. Okay. Any questions about what we're here to do together today? Okay, I'm trying to warm us up into the theme before I hand it off to all of you, the experts, and kind of why we chose this theme this year of tribal climate resilience. So this is, if you've been with Tribal Climate Health Project before, you might have seen this thing on the right, which is this framework that we built a long time ago to try to explain how how climate change, the drivers of climate change result in certain exposures. Exposures might mean those first 5 things, the things that hit our climate conditions and change them, and cascade effects from there. So those 5 exposures we usually talk about include temperature extremes, wildfires, storms and flooding, drought, melting ice, and sea level rise. Here today, we're really focusing on not so much the slow-moving climate impacts and exposures, but the ones that are more acute, the ones that hit hard and are considered disasters. So that's kind of the first thing I want you to kind of put in your brain about what we're here to talk about today, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we think of that. Those exposures often cascade down to secondary exposures, and we think of those as those effects are going to change air quality, vectors, water insecurity, and food insecurity. So these are all the kinds of things that will hit your community as an exposure. You don't have a lot of control over it, but they do create impacts to the things that you care about. And our framework does what many frameworks do in climate adaptation, which is splits those impacts into natural environment, built environment, and health and social environment, which for this program is really a focus area. We think of health and social environment as human health, cultural, spiritual health, and socioeconomic health. And those are the things that hit your community, that come into contact with you and the assets and the people you care about, and why we create strategies to protect community assets. And so we do that through a planning process typically, but today we're focused on what happens past planning, where we actually are experiencing the worst case scenario that we were theoretically looking at. And these are the kinds of health issues we typically look at, but today we're going to focus mainly on those things that come as a result of a disaster. So we do see disaster-related, heat-related illness. We do see disaster-related asthma and increased respiratory illnesses. We do see perpetuated infections that might come as a result of flooding. So there's all sorts of things that here are definitely both health-related and emergency-related, and we're going to get into some of those details. But here's some of the ones that we want to focus on today. These are some of the more acute climate-related disasters that we hear from when we talk to tribes, because we've been working directly with tribes on climate adaptation and developing plans and helping you all communicate with each other about the risks. So wildfire, obviously. How many of you have experienced a wildfire? Right. Okay, so we know the science, and we've got the climate scientists here for the 5th climate assessment here in California. We know that those are just, the short story is it's going to get worse, right? Projected a further increase in frequency and intensity as climate and ecosystems warm and dry, seeing more fuel. And what kind of acute health emergencies might we see? Well, burns, injuries, and deaths, respiratory illnesses from smoke exposure, power outages, limiting access to communications, water, and medical equipment, damage to or closure of roads and infrastructure, limiting evacuation or access to health services and supplies. So right now we're starting to get into like what happens as a result of these things that we hear about with climate change, and how does it actually affect your community? Because the idea here between both climate adaptation and the emergency folks that are here is we're all trying to help you get ahead of it, to predict it so that you can do something about it, and when it comes, to actually be able to be prepared to respond as well as you possibly can and reduce suffering. Destruction of resources is important to cultural well-being as well. Flooding, similar. Again, projected increase in extreme rainfall events and tropical storms that might trigger flash floods, prolonged flooding along rivers and streams, coastal flooding exacerbated by sea level rise. Who here has experienced flooding? Okay. So drowning and injuries might result. Again, power outages, again, damage to and closure of certain facilities or roads or infrastructure. It might even affect your water systems, right? And destruction of resources important to cultural well-being. And then heat. Heat is, of course, projected to increase as well, up to 2.8 to 7.3 degrees by 2071 to 2100, including more frequent and longer extreme heat events. So in that case, we think about as an acute event where a heat wave has come, and it's really hot and it's lasting a while. Heat-related illnesses and deaths are something we're trying to protect your community from. Respiratory illnesses, because the ozone level has gone up, so we do see more instances in hospital admissions. And then power outages again, right? Brownouts. So things, all of that limiting access to communication, water, and medical equipment. So does anybody here know anybody on dialysis? So that's the kind of thing we're thinking of, right? Like when the power goes out, so many things go wrong. That's just a little bit of a wet of the whistle of the kinds of things we want to talk to you about today and get you to think about your experiences and how we can help get your community out in front of them to prepare yourself when it does come. So climate action or climate adaptation is not the only way to do this work. You probably know that. There's lots of planning processes. One comes from public health, another from climate adaptation, then we got our emergency management folks. It's always kind of a two-pronged process. The first one is an assessment of risk. How bad is it going to get? When is it going to get bad? How severe and likely is it? What does our community have to say about it? What do we know already? What do we still need to know? And then the second process is usually a plan. How are you going to address those risks or vulnerabilities? And it's an identification, usually with your community, of strategies that can help lower those risks, mitigate those risks, eliminate them if you can, but at the end of the day, back to trying to reduce suffering, damages, and costs. So this is me trying to give you like a quick intro to some of what tribal emergency world looks like, but I'm not the expert, and you're going to hear from the experts. So I'm actually going to do some Oprah-ing out here in a second and like let them kind of help ground set us a minute just so we know what we're talking about before we really jump. There are quite a few types of tribal emergency plans that you might do. How many of you have heard of a hazard mitigation plan? Okay, how many of you have an active one? Okay, yeah, that was fewer hands. I can imagine there's reasons why. Okay, so they are required for FEMA funding eligibility. It's similar, it's an assessment of the hazards. There's a lot of overlap, right? Jamie and I were talking, Jamie's one of our speakers, between hazard mitigation and climate exposures. And in fact, if you're looking at their list on the right, it's almost everything is both a hazard that would go into that plan, but also a climate adaptation exposure that you would put in a climate adaptation plan. And so there's a lot of ways to come at it. The things that don't fit are like maybe dam failure, earthquake, and tsunami, but everything else is sort of the same. But there's some differences between these plans. We'll probably like get a better understanding of that today and why you might do one or the other, or maybe more and more people are combining them and doing both at once. They're often multi-jurisdictional or tribal specific. They basically help you identify risks and strategies for long-term vulnerability. In the past, it was really based on using historical information to try to project out what the risks would be, but only on a 5-year timeline. But I think what's changing in the field is to do more to try to integrate the climate projections. So not to just assume that the trend line of what had been happening over the last 50 years will continue, but to say, uh-oh, the climate is changing, it's becoming different, so we probably, the trend line is changing, which might be like, oh, wildfire severity increases going like this, and then you have to prepare accordingly. So that's one thing that we do in the climate adaptation field is a deep, deep assessment of those models and what the forecasts and projections look like. But there's a bunch of other emergency plans, and I'm not gonna go into detail on these, but some of you might have them. Emergency operation plans, continuity of operation plans, emergency response plans, evacuation plans, recovery, I think that's supposed to be recovery plans, and continuity of government plans, and then many of those get integrated into a comprehensive tribal emergency management plan that encompasses multiple plan types. So I'm only giving you like the broad brush of words that you may have come across. How many of you actually have an emergency person on staff within your tribe? Okay, like it's pretty rare. Otherwise, you might be like Shasta, who kind of just like, or Cindy, or a bunch of you that like kind of play that role alongside your 40 other jobs, right? Okay. So for our focus today, like I said, we kind of in the past on this program really focused in on the planning process. So we've had a whole summit on getting to the heart of vulnerability and looking at the data super deeply. How do you guys kind of how do we make it easier for you to fact find, to understand where your risks are? So like, how hot will it get? How many storms will come? How often will the power go out? Like looking at the data so that you can have well-informed decisions. So that was one summit. The next summit was on adaptation planning. So how do you take those vulnerabilities and turn it into real strategies that can actually improve the resilience of your community and impact lives? And that was good. Our last summit was on implementation. So like turning from planning to action, like how do you actually take those strategies and implement them in real time? But this one is beyond planning. If we were to look at the theoretical things that we thought might happen, now we're gonna put ourselves in the shoes of, uh-oh, it's happening right now. The reality is to respond to and recover from actual climate-driven extreme events using tactics from the emergency field. So like we're gonna get ourselves ready to face it when it hits, okay? And now this is when I'm gonna go Oprah-ing out because I think I need my experts. The difference is a little bit between climate adaptation and emergency management. Climate adaptation might be more about like long-term strategies to adjust to changing climate conditions. An adaptation plan, you might be looking 50 or more years out. These are the kinds of strategies you might see, but the focus is on reducing vulnerability over time. On emergency and disaster management, we're talking about immediate readiness to respond to disasters and crises, and the focus is on protecting lives during acute events. And here's my wander out into the crowd. I know some experts are here, and I want to hear that if you are a tribal emergency expert or from the state, how would you characterize the difference here up front, just so we're all on the same page? And Melissa sees me coming. Would you?
Hi, I'm Melissa Boudre. I'm the Resilience Branch Chief at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. I think this is a really solid definition. So when we're looking at hazard mitigation and climate adaptation, we really are looking at long-term structural planning, looking at communities, community-level adaptation, how to really assess like your infrastructure, your environment, elements of your community that are at risk from those hazards and how to address those with long-term goals in mind. We can look at short-term mitigation as well, but emergency disaster management is truly like, what do you need to stabilize immediately after disaster? What can you do? What's most at risk for those disasters? So like looking at your life-saving, life-sustaining capabilities, what resources do you currently have within your vicinity to access? Where are your resource shortfalls, or like what you need in a disaster that you might not have on hand that you might need to bring in or deploy?
See, she knows what she's doing. We're glad she's here. Maybe I want a word from Jamie.
Well, I would agree, obviously, with Cal OES. I'd be crazy to stand here and not agree. But I would say that climate adaptation and hazard mitigation go hand in hand, because that's there's a problem, what are you going to do about it today? Whereas the emergency disaster management, that's the shit hit the storm, how are you going to deal? So yeah, I agree. I think that there's one common misconception with hazard mitigation plans, and I write lots of them, is that people think in a disaster you're going to pull it out and see what to do, and that's not the case. It's the plan to guide you so you don't have a disaster. So we can't avoid some of these risks or hazards, things like the climate changing, like your tribe is not going to change climate change necessarily. The extreme heat will happen, but what do you do when it's hot so that it doesn't become worse for your people, your economy, etc.
Thank you. You're going to hear more from both of these guys later on. We got a whole hour and a half with Jamie, who's going to walk you through this process deeply. Anyone else had to chime in? Did we get something wrong? Oh, good.
Yeah, good morning, you guys. My name's Donna Miranda-Begay. I'm with the Tabatalabo tribe in Kern Valley. Also work with UC Davis. We're studying all the allotment lands in California, tribal lands that are held in trust by the United States government. A lot of times they don't get any support because a lot of them are owned by non-federally recognized tribal individuals. So what we're doing is looking at the mapping world of risk areas and educating our allottees out there what's considered high risk as far as their allotment lands. And also, for me, I live on tribal land, 160 acres, and we had a fire just 4 miles north of our property. Luckily, the winds took it away from our property versus towards us. But it's important as allotment owners to make sure the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Kern County Fire Department, they all knew we existed. And that's one of the challenges I have is a lot of maps for emergency response do not include public domain lands. So I always tell people that'll be my legacy when, when that happens for every single map in regards to emergency response. But thank you, it's really good. So, and I also have a lot of experience working with the California Conservation Corps, 10 years of that, so yeah.
I think we have a lot of good brains in the room. Donna, I'm so glad you're here. You came to our webinar recently, right? Yay, okay. All right. This is just to learn a little bit more about who's in the room before we turn to our first interactive activity, which is going to be some breakout conversations on these disasters. Who here works for a tribe? Most people in the room. We were hoping that. Who represents a state agency or different tribal serving organization? Thank you all for coming. All right, for our tribal rep. Oh, cool. Right, so like other service providers, right? Like people that are supporting tribes in different ways. And back there too, we're gonna hear from Hillary later. Great, for the folks that are representing tribes in the room, does your tribe have a vulnerability assessment? Raise your hand. A couple. How about a hazard mitigation plan? Okay, a few more. Does your tribe have any sort of disaster or emergency response, preparedness management, or operations plan? Are you, Ray, right? I knew it, okay. Okay, so you're here probably because you have some work ahead of you, right? So let's get into it. Let's help you learn a little bit more about this. You can take some takeaways home.